Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for everyone who joined. This will also be recorded so you can listen to it or share it with others. But Chambers 2023 rankings were just released. We heard a lot of words like frustrated, annoyed, bugging my clients, why not me, why not these attorneys? These are all words that we heard from in-house marketers and from law firms and lawyers alike. Chambers can be a very frustrating process for many who've been at it for several years. We've even seen firms ban it altogether because of the accumulation of frustration of not getting ranked over the years. If you're still interested in Chambers and you're still here, today I'm going to tell you how you can increase your chances of getting ranked. None of this is an exact science. This is really how you position yourself better. It's learning more about Chambers so that you can use that to your advantage. So this is really how do you increase your chances of getting ranked. Who am I? I'm Megan Braverman, Burbay Marketing and Public Relations. We specialize in working with law firms. We are not Chambers representatives. We've been submitting to Chambers since really 1990 when they first began. So this is all from our experience working with law firms to submit Chambers nominations and helping firms get ranked. I want to start out with a poll. It's just a simple 3 questions. So let me see if I can. Okay, you should see 3 questions open up on your screen. If you could just quickly answer, I would love to get a feel for everybody who's listening. So these are questions. Have you submitted to Chambers before? How many years have you gone after? And in your opinion, do you think it's the most coveted ranking for law firms? Letting a few more results come in, and then I will share some findings so we all can know who's listening. Okay, so overwhelmingly, you have submitted to Chambers before. A few of you have not. Really split in terms of a few people that have mostly gone after it for a year to 2 years, and then 14% of you 3 to 5 years, and 43% of you 5 or more. So some have been going after it for a long time, and almost unanimously, you all think it's the most coveted ranking for law firms, except for one person out there. So thank you for that. That's helpful. So I want to start with a few things about why is Chambers such a big deal? So a few fun facts. I mean, obviously, we all know the 2023 rankings were just released in June. Some firms found out earlier. We've actually noticed an uptick in Chambers rankings announcements slipping out, mostly by salespeople or business development folk. But I think there's some interesting things that have come from these rankings. But some general fun facts is that it began in 1990. Right now, Chamber covers 200 jurisdictions and well over 100 practice areas, and they continue to add new tables every year. Guides are also geographic, so they've got USA, Canada, Latin America, etc. We all know that, well, some of you know that Chambers is a tough list to get on. A lot of you have been going after it for 5+ years. They have built a reputation on their selectivity. It's about 2% of US law firms that are ranked, and you cannot buy your way in, at least that we don't know of. To share a little history about these rankings, when legal rankings were first introduced, it was like yellow pages for lawyers. Some of these things existed, but it was different, like Martindale-Hubbell, for example. They were one of the first. It was practice area specific. You could easily find the kind of lawyer that you were looking for. But many of these directories that popped up were just comprehensive. They included any lawyer, regardless of the caliber of their work. And so then introduce exclusive rankings like Chambers, and Chambers is not the only one touting sort of the exclusivity of their rankings. But you started to see this where Chambers and others were really ranking folks on quality and caliber of their work. So today, Chambers has grown tremendously. I think they have over 200 employees now. They have began to sell product offerings. They're adding new practice area tables annually. You're seeing just a lot more names with new chamber staff members, so it's growing. So I wanted to get to the crux of this. I call it the $1 million question, which is who's using these directories. You know, we speak to and listen to corporate and in-house counsel regularly and talking about whether or not they use chambers. And really, it's 50-50. Some folks use it, some counsel use it. A lot of an answer that you're going to commonly hear is that they use it to find lawyers in unfamiliar jurisdictions, or if they're looking for a real specialty lawyer. I think that this can be great for law firms or for lawyers that have a really specialized practice area, gaming, international trade. I mean, Chambers even added a cannabis practice table. So they're really expanding the areas that they're looking for. So, but I do think that the people using these directories tend to use them to find specialized expertise. And then the $1 billion question is it worth it? I think this really goes back to your larger marketing objectives. You know, for example, if you are a plaintiff law firm that's representing consumers, the general public is not going to use Chambers to find a lawyer. They're probably using other means to find a lawyer. Let's say you're a law firm and really you're only working in New York or only in California. And so maybe it doesn't make sense because you're really just focusing on that state or that region to submit for Chambers, because Chambers is really more of a national and international ranking. Another thing is to consider is your resources. I mean, this is an every year endeavor. You have to commit to the long game approach. So if you're not really willing to commit to Chambers for a long time, you might not want to consider it at all. We spend about 40 hours per submission, give or take. I mean, sometimes it's more. If it's the first time you're ever submitting, you could be looking at double that time. So those are some of the things to think about in terms of whether it's worth it. I really believe it's a case-by-case basis. So I'm going to be answering some kind of big ticket questions and then doing a rapid Q&A at the end, but I do encourage you to submit any questions through the Q&A. I will answer everything. So how does Chambers work? I thought this was a really important piece to touch on because a lot of people don't understand how the research works at Chambers. So Chambers has researchers. I mentioned before, they've got like over 200 employees. Most of them are researchers. Keep in mind, these folks are living in the UK. They may not know a lot about US markets, and your submission really has to speak to them. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's this written submission and these researchers are reviewing all of them. Keep in mind, it's hundreds. And on the slide here, you can see what they're looking for: evident legal ability, client service, caliber of bench, the fact that you've demonstrated diligence. So these are sort of the factors that they're looking for when they're reviewing your submission. We're going to talk more about the written submission later, but that's an important piece. So they've reviewed these submissions. That's one. They're going to contact your referees. Referees, for those that don't know, I'm sure all of you know, but it's clients and other attorneys or other folks that you've partnered with that can talk about your work. Clients are always better, but it could be other folks that you co-counsel or partner with. So again, we're going to talk about this later, but they're going to contact your referees and learn more about your work and the caliber of your work. The other piece is they randomly interview attorneys who are included on these written submissions. So not all attorneys are interviewed, but let's say you've listed one of your practice heads or one of your partners, very likely Chambers might come to you and want to interview them. They're going to be asked different questions. They get a feel for the market. They want to talk about competitors. They want to see who you deem worthy. And they're tracking all of this information. Every single word and firm name that comes out of your mouth, they're actually tracking this information. And I can showcase that a little bit later. So that's the other piece. And then last piece is outside research. So this is everything online. So they've, reviewed your submissions, they've contacted referees, they've spoken to a few attorneys, and then everything that lives online. So your bio, the things attached to your bio, maybe where you've been published, they're kind of calling the internet for all of this information. The time frame of this, they have a research schedule that's posted online, and they tell you exactly when submissions are due. But this research really does take a long time, even though they say it takes a month. Oftentimes, it can take longer than that. So you're really working with chambers throughout the year. So moving on, what is the most important aspect of the nomination? So without a doubt, referees. It is all about the referees. So again, they call it referees. These are clients or co-counsel that can talk about the caliber of your work. They recently increased it. You can submit now 30 names. It used to be 20. Take advantage of this. We believe that Chambers puts more weight on the referees than the actual written submission itself. And again, this is just based on our experience. One of the big issues with referees that we see across the board is that response rates are low. So we typically get around less than 30% response rate. This is very, very low. Chambers is not talking to enough referees if you're getting lower than a 30% response rate. So there's a lot that goes into this, and there's a lot of strategy that you want to apply to it. One example is an obvious, which is, are you submitting the right client names? I mean, again, this is the most important aspect. So the referees that you put forth, they have to be responsive. It's really important that you don't include referees that are very busy and you probably know that they're not going to respond. So you can look to second in commands, third in commands. Do not list them if they are not responsive. The other aspect is, ensuring that you prepare your referees and let them know that the chamber's email is coming. There's a whole host of problems that can come with this. I mean, one is that oftentimes chambers emails will go to spam, or they look like spam, so your referees ignore them. Oftentimes they might get it and not respond right away. You need to not only let them know that it's coming, but you should also prepare them in terms of the process, like what they're expected. Chambers usually wants a phone interview. They will take written responses, but not always. It's helpful that the referee knows all of this, and you really need to hold their hand through it. That's what you should do. And again, sometimes people put off responding because they're not really sure how they should respond or don't feel prepared. And so stepping them through the process is really critical to getting a higher response rate. You also, the other thing is you can connect with the researcher throughout this entire process to see what your response rate is. We encourage you to do that. So you should introduce yourselves to the researcher and check in with them periodically. The catch is they're not going to tell you who's responded. So because of confidentiality, there's little transparency. They're not going to say, well, Jane responded, but Bob didn't. So that is one of the bigger challenges. We encourage you to talk with your clients, but there's obviously a fine line of how much you want to reach out to them regarding chambers, especially because you're doing this every year. One little tidbit I wanted to let everybody know that most firms are not aware of is Chambers has something called the 3-month rule. So let's say I'm a lawyer, I'm submitting to Chambers, and one of my referees is Jane Higgins. Okay, Jane is a client, I submit Jane Higgins. When Jane Higgins is put forth, it's put into Chambers database, okay? And if Jane Higgins was listed as another referee for another law firm and was contacted within the last 3 months, they will not contact that person. They will also not let you know that they're not contacting that person. They have this 3-month rule in place because they don't want to bug people too much. But unfortunately, there's very little transparency in terms of if I put it forth as my referee, I'm not going to know that another law firm did that a couple months ago and that it was just, first come, first serve. So that's one of the issues. Chambers has tried to combat these problems because I think we've all been very vocal about it. They recently launched a referee management tool that you can pay for. This is not necessarily a tool we recommend using. This is only their second year doing it. So you have to remember that there's going to be some bumps in the roads. But this is on the slide, you'll see kind of a screenshot of this. So what this is saying, this is kind of a back end they're giving you access to, which shows you all the names that you submitted as referees. And it will actually tell you very specifically who's responded, who's pending because they haven't made contact, who is pending because Chambers hasn't heard back from them. What's an error? Maybe it was bounced or that got filtered in some way. So firms you have to pay Chambers for this tool. And again, this is a new tool that gives a little bit more transparency than what we had before. So that's referees. That's a really, really important piece. And I can't emphasize it enough, but I want to also spend a little time on the written submission. So like what else? Okay. If we can master the referee part, which is the number one goal, the written submission is obviously important as well. So, the one thing is follow the form. Chambers, they're reading hundreds of these. So it's really important that you don't augment the form in any way. I think it can work against you. Your matters matter. So again, you have to remember that the researchers are reading hundreds of these submissions. It's really, really important that you describe your matters not only in a way that's digestible, but also highlighting the importance. Like why is this matter important? Why is this included? What was the outcome? What was the impact that this matter had? I mean, you really need to underscore all of the important aspects of the matter. Don't just leave it as a basic description. I can't tell you how many times when we read law firms' descriptions, this is one of the biggest issues. They're really not packaging their material in the right way. And again, think of the reader. This is a UK-based researcher. They're a relatively young staff. They're still learning the U.S. landscape. So think about who's actually getting these submissions. The other overlooked aspect of the written submission is the B10 section. We talk about this section all the time. Here's a little snippet of what they're asking. So what is this department best known for? Include industry sector expertise, recent areas of growth, and it's a 500-word count limit. So this is where you sell yourself. A lot of people gloss over this section. They use very generic descriptions of your practice. It's practically what's on the website. But this is actually the only part of the nomination that you can sell yourself. And so one thing that we see time and time again is don't duplicate anything in your bio on your website or anything throughout the rest of the submission. So again, it should be new material because remember, researchers are doing outside research. So the things that are on your bio and your website are likely going to be seen. So you want to avoid marketing fluff. I mean, they used to actually call this out, like, please avoid marketing fluff. It needs to be substantive information. Don't call yourself an unparalleled attorney, like say that you've done over 4 billion in deal transactions in the last year, or, recover this many, millions on behalf of clients. So you want to quantify what you've done and really put forth those that warrant inclusion, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the other part of this section as well is use it as an opportunity to highlight the individuals that you want to get ranked. So if your goal is like, oh, we really got to get Paul ranked, showcase Paul here. Reserve this B10 section to highlight the people that you really want them to consider. Okay, so what else? Let's say you're doing all of this, which you're probably not, but what else? So one thing that we see is, are you submitting for the right area? So, there's regional, whether it's Los Angeles or New York markets, there's national, there's all different tables that you should consider. And sometimes we find firms not submitting for the right area. For example, they submit for litigation nationally because they have a national litigation practice. But if that firm or its lawyers are not ranked regionally, securing that national spot is really difficult. You want to focus on the regional rankings first. The other wrong area we see a lot is the practice area. Sometimes, can you really fill all 20 matters? We see a lot of firms submitting that they're only putting forth 2 or 3 matters. I think that you have to really fill half. That's not, that's not something that we know, but we have a feeling that it's like, if you're going to go for it, you've got to at least have 10. So, or you may find your litigation submission is really labor employment specific. So you should consider submitting to labor employment instead. So that could be one area. The other is, do you have realistic expectations? This is a big one. We see a lot of times that firms are submitting everyone. They're putting forth everyone. And frankly, not everyone warrants inclusion. And I think this is where managing expectations come in. You have to let people down. Sometimes the nomination really needs to focus on your best and brightest people, and those that have worthy cases to put forth in the last year. Again, not everyone has, a lot of activity in the last 12 months. Maybe it was a slow year. There are other reasons why you submit, but you really have to make sure that you're putting forth the right people. And again, there's no formula with this. The other piece is, are you giving yourself enough time? I mean, Chambers is one of the most extensive nominations. So if you're rushing through it or starting a few weeks before, it's going to result in a less than par nomination. And we usually get 3 months ahead of time. Sometimes it's more if it's your first time. The other is, do you want to pay to get more information from Chambers? So again, we're not Chambers representatives, and I'm absolutely not saying go buy all their products, but there are 2 offerings you should be aware of if you feel like you're really hitting a brick wall and not getting the rankings that you deserve after you've sort of taken some of these tips and really applied them. So the first one is the Client and Market Intelligence Report. This was formerly called Insights. They've renamed it. So basically what this is a report that Chambers provides to you for a price that gives you very specific feedback on their vantage point of your firm, how it's positioned in the market, sort of where things stand. They also have put the Client and Market Intelligence Report have added a few things, like there's greater focus on getting apples to apples with competition. So if you're a small firm, you're not necessarily going to be compared to very large firms because it's completely different. You actually see whose Chambers deems as your competitors. So this is not the competitors you would see. These are the competitors that they see. And it just showcases where firms are ranked. You get a lot more personalized submission guidance from researchers and just insight in terms of your response rate from referees compared to market average. It's really the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can also use some of the things in there for marketing purposes, but that's the Client and Market Intelligence Report. The other one is that they have this new thing called the Research Analytics Tool. Again, also something that you pay for that we're not necessarily endorsing, but want everyone to be aware. But it really is sort of an analytical tool around your firm's data within Chambers. What this can do is it can help you be a little bit more strategic about who you put forth. So for example, it will show the change in rankings across departments, across people, the number of firm mentions in interviews compared to market average. Again, remember when I said that they were interviewing attorneys and they're literally tallying how many times they're hearing certain names. This is where those numbers are reflected. And so you get a sense of, okay, this is how many mentions our practice got compared to market average. So it is a helpful tool in terms of getting a sense of what Chambers is thinking. I wanted to go to a rapid Q&A, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. One is Chambers for big firms only. So Chambers considers the size of law firms, and they don't consider the size of law firms, excuse me. The larger firms certainly dominate. We've seen that a lot, but they do absolutely consider and rank smaller firms. They have an entire page on their website that explains their commitment to smaller firms. I think the Chambers has made a bigger push to do this. Once I'm on the list, do I have to submit every year? Yes, that's unfortunately it's difficult. And when you do get ranked, you don't necessarily drop off. But if you aren't keeping up with the process and submitting your work each year, you're not going to move bands and you could eventually fall off. Can I ask for extensions? You should contact them as soon as you know you won't be meeting their deadline. They're almost every time we've asked for an extension, they ask for us to get the referees in first, and they'll give us 1 extra week on the written submission. But we do think that submitting late can work against you because, especially if you don't get your referees in time and your referees aren't responding, they just may drop it sooner. Should you stay in front of chambers in other ways? The short answer is yes. Researchers do change from year to year. So that can be a challenge just to keep apprised of the staff changes. But they do like to receive press releases, and it can be sent to pressreleases@chambers.com. And so that's a good way to just keep them informed about what you're doing throughout the year. The next question, is there a limit to how many nominations you can submit? No, you just need to be judicious and realistic about the nominations that you're pursuing. As I mentioned, don't go after everything. What if my clients never respond? If they never respond and you continue to get low engagement rates, you have to start thinking of other names. You can talk with clients in verbal conversations, but you've got to start putting forth folks that are going to respond. What are the up and coming or associate lists to watch? So as many of you might know, there are 6 bands in chambers, 1 through 6, but they do have a few additional bands for younger lawyers. They have an up and coming list for those that don't yet have an established reputation, but they're driving the firm's growth. And they also have an associates to watch list, which is more for senior associates who are recognized for their work in major deals and cases. Should I buy a chambers profile? So I think you've heard throughout this presentation, we don't necessarily endorse all of these products. If you do get ranked, you have the option to purchase a profile. What this means is you get, to put your bio, your headshot, some other things. It gets you a little bit more visibility on the Chambers site. It comes up higher on Google's search engine. So there are some benefits, but you really need to think about if it's worth the cost and where that fits into your larger marketing initiatives. And I think it's something to consider for some firms, but others, you might want to pass. What if I don't get interviewed by Chambers? Is that a bad sign? It's not a bad sign. It's really not a sign at all. It's random. They randomly select who they're going to interview, and you really can't influence it. So I wouldn't worry about it. Should I hire an agency or do this in-house? We get this question a lot. There's obviously a lot of pros to hiring an agency. As I mentioned, it takes a long time. You get a team of specialists at your disposal. I think, hiring an agency that's had experience, you might have a more compelling nomination. You can juggle all the moving parts. And having a dedicated resource commit to that time-consuming application is helpful. I think there's obviously benefit for those doing it in-house because that person has a lot more company familiarity there, but there is benefit to having fresh eyes from an outside agency helping, especially if you're not making any inroads. If I'm still not ranked after 5 years, now what? If you're still not ranked after 5 years, definitely hire an agency. I think you need to audit your submission and see what's not working, and get feedback from Chambers on your submission. Chambers will give you a little feedback when solicited. They're not going to give you what's in the insight or the client market intelligence report, but they will give you a little insight. So you should ask. And really, it could be just that you're making the same mistakes year after year. How do I determine my chances beforehand? You can't. Again, your matters matter. So put forth really good matters, really focus on your referees who are willing to participate. That's going to provide a lot of value. How do I move up bands? We get this question a lot, and a lot of folks are disappointed when they find that their first ranking or their second ranking is band 6. There's no formula for this either. It's not an exact science, but I think it's a lot of things we already talked about, which is really making sure that you're using the submission, you're thinking about who's reading the submission, and getting your referees to respond. So that's how you move up bands. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. So these are some of the questions we get all the time. If you have questions, I will take them now. If not, I really appreciate you listening. I hope you got a little pearl of wisdom. We're always available for any Chambers questions. We're really an open book when it comes to this, and happy to share any of our experiences with you, but really appreciate everyone participating.